Welcome to another episode of Overeducated, Underloved Millennials. My name's Katie, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Adam. Hi, Adam.
Hi, you all right?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How was your week?
Yeah, pretty busy. It was my partner's birthday yesterday, so we had Colin the caterpillar cake, which was all around.
Colin, as opposed, so you had Colin as opposed to what were the other ones?
Curly
and
yeah, it was. Well, actually, I say Colin the caterpillar. I believe it was Curly. So. Oh,
well, there you go. You can't make that mistake.
We've engaged in that issue. But that's not what it's going to be about today, the podcast. It's actually going to be about the mini budget. We're going to be talking about the mini budget today that was released last week. We're going to be talking about Labour conference as it wrapped up in Liverpool with Keir Starmer's final speech yesterday, outlining Labour's vision, and also the elections in Italy, which occurred over the weekend, and the resurgence and consolidation of power of the far right. Which, you know, we're all thrilled about. That was sarcasm. Sarcasm.
Yeah, please nobody clip that.
Yeah. So, Adam, how's your been, and you know what's going on?
So with the mini budget, as also it wasn't the official. I believe it was officially called a fiscal statement or a fiscal update. I think was the official term, which I feel was. The talk is apparently they called it that rather than a budget because they didn't want any sort of official forecast to be done on it, which I wonder why, based on what's happened in the last 5 days.
Fiscal update or downgrade. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so obviously, so Kwasi Kwarteng gave this announcement on Wednesday, and very simply, I mean, it was a lot of tax cuts. So I've got a few written down: abolishing the top rate of tax, the 45% top rate of tax, income tax. Cancelling the corporation tax increase, scrapping bankers' bonuses. What other things were there? There was the 38 investment zones, which I do want to talk about because that just makes me feel very uncomfortable for a number of reasons. Oh, and also the scrapping of the national insurance increase as well. And there was lots of other. Essentially, just it was sum up. It was basically a lot of tax cuts. However, these tax cuts, well, essentially weren't funded. They weren't costed. And the IFS, for example, has estimated that these tax cuts will require nearly £45 billion of additional borrowing by the fiscal year of 2026-27. And clearly the response to that from the international markets, as we've seen by the sort of the decrease in value of the pound, has been rather poor. And I think we've also seen comments from the IMF. We've seen sort of hints, not direct criticisms, but sort of indirect hints from the United States that they aren't particularly thrilled about this policy as well. So really, it doesn't seem to have been a good 5 days for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. I mean, I've seen lots of jokes about how this has been a kamikaze budget, and I think so many people have used that joke, and I think it is starting to stick, which is probably not a good thing if that's your first thing you do as Chancellor. So yeah, not particularly good. And yeah, so what did you think, Casey?
So, you know, in comes the socialist. Obviously, I was absolutely disgusted on a basis of this being a time of a cost of living crisis where the country is struggling. We're in the middle of an energy crisis. People are already asking for help to engage in a political policy which engages in trickle-down economics, which has, to this point, from an academic point of view, which we look at, and an economic point of view, has been proven to not work. Trickle-down economics now is not a mainstream economic program anymore. It is not pursued anymore by main governments. You mentioned the United States of America. We can't confirm, but I think it's very, very telling that Joe Biden tweeted that trickle-down economics is dead and it doesn't work, and that he will not be pursuing that policy at the same time that Liz Truss entered the United States of America to go and talk to him. I think that is one hell of a coincidence if it was not targeted. So to introduce such economic policy, which will see the top 40, the top percent of people getting that 45% tax rate completely it's going to cost us, so me and you who are actually not rich, it's going to cost us £2 billion to shore that up. We're literally taking money from poor people and giving it to rich people, because the amount that we're going to have to borrow is going to have to be paid back by somebody.
That's the thing that concerns me, is obviously, so when you borrow more, particularly now, because of the fact that there is lots of borrowing on day-to-day spending, it seems, you're borrowing, and we've seen this, the borrowing becomes more expensive, and it is becoming more expensive. This has been shown quite clearly. And the thing that concerns me is if we increase all this debt on such sort of silly, unnecessary things, when it comes to the future, when we require borrowing for investment in things that will actually help the economy, it makes it much harder for future governments, right? So in theory, let's say if Labour wanted to invest more in its infrastructure in the future, because of this quite just I don't know what the word is, fiscally irresponsible budget statement, it'll make it harder, it'll make it more expensive. And for me, it just screams of, I don't know what the word is, just complete detachment from reality. I just don't understand how they think this is a good idea.
It screams of smash and grab.
Yeah.
The more and more that I'm seeing Liz Truss in this form of government, the more and more that I am convinced that she is not looking to Britain's future for our economic policy. She's not planning for the future. She's literally not even responding to what's happening. She has got in with the sole purpose of doing this. And I think that comes in with, she's attacking it from an ideological perspective, which is not the way that you handle an economy. It's the way. The economy doesn't care about your ideology. It doesn't care. It's
just. But if she needs to get re-elected, right? There's going to be an election in 2 years, and as we've seen from the polling, and there was the YouGov poll, I think it was 2 days ago, which showed Labour 17 points ahead.
Yeah.
This hasn't gone down well, and I don't understand how.
She's polling worse than the Conservatives polled during the 2001 election.
Yeah.
She's polling worse than that. It makes no sense. And to sit here, this is, like I said, we had the budget released. Everybody was absolutely incensed. I will say, find me anybody on here that's like, oh, these are just two lefty liberal, millennials. No, find me an actual credible economist that will tell you that budget was fiscally responsible. Never mind about morally reprehensible, which I also believe it is, but find me an economist that will say fiscally responsible, because every single one, and I have been reading over the past week, which I don't read because I'm a socialist, I've been reading the Financial Times, The Economist, all of these right-wing papers, The Telegraph, for one as well.
I think it's a bit harsh to call The Economist an FT right wing.
Okay, so neoliberal, The Economist, I would say.
Yeah.
It's neoliberal, so it would be right up her street, right? They are not defending this. They are condemning it. They're saying, this is silly. It's not going to work. It's not responsible. So you've got literal bankers coming out and saying, no, it's wrong.
Yeah,
the people that are going to gain money from it.
It is. I think the obvious sign, I think, is obviously the loss in value of the pound, which of course had a steep drop straight after the statement was announced. But I think I would point out, actually, I think people talk about the drop in the pound, but our pound, the value of the pound has been deflating for some time now. And it seems only now the media are really starting to talk about it. So just to give you some ideas, since the start of this year, so the start of 2022, the value of the pound against the US dollar has dropped by just over 20%. It's dropped by just over 5% against the euro, which is not a particularly strong currency at the moment. And just to give you another sort of major economy example, it's dropped by just over 13% against the Canadian dollar. So really, this is a sign, and this isn't us lefty liberals saying how terrible the economic policy is. This is hardcore capitalists who clearly are, betting against Britain because they have no faith in the Conservative Party's economic policy. And, it's not us saying it. It's, as I said, it's bankers, it's traders, it's
people that we would usually disagree with, right?
So it's people who would, yeah.
With we're all agreeing.
It's crazy. So should we go through some of the policies in the budget? So we've talked about the abolishing the 45% highest rate of income tax. Again, it's just a case of, first of all, it's just morally, I don't understand at this point. Where are your priorities? It makes no sense. 45p was like 45p. I think we might disagree. I'm assuming would you support a 50p?
I would support 60p in the pound, but
see, I think we disagree on that. I'm happy to keep it at 45, but for me, below that is just, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make no sense.
Tax more, Maggie. 60 in the pound.
Oh god, yeah.
That's Labour's favourite comeback. That is, no, Maggie did it. Maggie did it.
Yeah. God, no. So apparently, I'm now more economically right wing than Thatcher. That's fine.
Yeah. I would raise it, but I wouldn't get rid of it completely. I think we on that. I wouldn't get rid of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a case of priorities, and it makes no sense. It's unnecessarily reducing your income. To me, it makes no sense. I just don't understand. So the next one was cancelling the corporation tax increase, which again, I can sort of understand. If it was part of a broader package to increase investment, I would understand. But cutting corporation tax on its own doesn't work. You need to invest in productivity. You need to have an economy that people have confidence in, which, as we've already talked about the currency, people don't have confidence in the British economy. So it's not going to work. I mean, it will not encourage investment if other things aren't in place.
Precisely. And I think that one of the arguments that I've seen over the week is that people are saying, it's to spur economic growth and to encourage businesses to start up and to, continue investing in the United Kingdom. But you've literally just said, well, they're not doing that because the pound is tumbling.
Yeah.
Nobody else. No other countries have faith in us right now. So what we need to do is we need to shore up our own economy and make Britain an attractive place to trade in, rather than essentially saying, hey, we're Britain and we believe it's 1850 and poor people should be like really, really poor, and and rich people should be really, really rich. And you're like, that's not where the world is also going at the moment. So even looking at it, so obviously, we always look at things from an international perspective as well. That's not the narrative at the moment. Even with these far right parties winning, they're using like homegrown narratives. Let's bring it back home. Let's invest in ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's like completely at odds with that as well. So you're like, I don't understand where you thought the corporation tax cuts would go if your whole outlook is very anti-growth and I don't get it.
So the next one, so I'm trying to go through these quite quickly because there's quite a few. The next one is the bankers' bonuses cap being scrapped, which I think, first of all, I'm assuming you will just understandably, you'll say it's morally
hated.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I can understand that from your perspective. But for me, actually, well, I understand that. I think there is more of a logical point as to why it's a bad idea, right? So one of the things the Tories were saying was, well, what happens is bankers just end up having a higher base salary because they get less bonuses. But actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? In the sense, so what I mean by this is
because they pay tax.
Yes. Well, first of all, but with bonuses, you achieve bonuses by making profit through a company, and in banking, that requires you to take risks. So the higher bonuses you can get, in theory, the more risks you're willing to take, and we know what happens when bankers take risks, as we saw at the end of the noughties.
We have enough trauma to know what that means.
Exactly. So actually, I think there is actually, you could make a strong, possibly, centre-right argument as to actually why it's better for the economy to cap these bonuses. I think that actually, again, it just, but that to me seems, and call me a cynic, this just seems like Liz Truss patting her campaign backers on the back. It sounds like a bunch of bankers backed her over Rishi, and she's now saying, there you go, that's your sort of gift. Obviously, I can't prove that, but
you don't prove it. But the thing is, what I think what the point. So the thing that I've been saying to people is prove to me that it isn't, because thus far there's no way that you can prove to me that this is a fiscally responsible policy. So if you can prove to me that it's not her doing that, then fine, we can have that conversation. But it's been Friday, it's been nearly a week, nobody has been able to prove that it's fiscally responsible, including the bankers. It needs to be said. There are a lot of bankers that have said this policy should not have been scrapped.
Yeah. So there is one more sort of one I'm concerned about, and there is actually two I want to give it some credit, because I'm a balanced, nice person. So there was the announcement of this very vague reference to these 38 investment zones in England. And first of all, we need more detail. First of all, it goes without saying, right? What does that even mean? To me, that sounds like essentially you're going to have 38 areas in England where you'll essentially have very, very low corporation tax. God knows what else. I mean, it comes across to me as very just shady. It seems a bit shady, and I really want to see some detail.
You know what I said to Chris? I said, my partner, I said, citation needed.
Exactly. Yeah. It's you look at it and you think, what does? And also, 38 zones. England isn't a big country.
I don't
38 know zones in England. That could be a lot of England, right? I don't understand. Again. And also, obviously, that raises the question: well, if you cut taxes in certain parts of England, does that mean other parts will then lose business? I mean, it's just there's so many questions and so little detail. And
approaching it from a cynical point of view, right? Obviously, as is my job as a member of the Labour Party, approaching it from a cynical point of view, these 38 zones, right, even if they do manage to proportion up these 38 zones, the level of detail that they have given is sketchy at best. It worries me on a level of, I'm from an area that Conservatives refuse to invest in. Is this another way in which they will utilise a policy to disinvest in the north? Because why would they invest there at the moment? Because, right, they've lost it, right? On current swing, it's gone. Like, it's no longer blue. So that's why I'm like, why are you not telling us?
It's interesting, yeah.
Is this going to further the north-south divide?
Well, I am wondering whether or not possibly you might get some of these zones in the north in a sort of attempt to win back to persuade Red Bull voters.
Manchester they can't touch because of Andy Burnham, but like are they going to be? They're going to try, like Blackpool is a really good example of this. They really want Blackpool back because it's their seat at the moment, but they want to keep it.
Yeah.
And it's faltering. So I can see what you're saying, but it's going to be surface level. It's not going to be
but that's what I'm saying. That's why we need detail, because it's so. And
I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think they're giving us detail on purpose. I think it's
yeah. I mean, to be honest, I could see this being a thing that kind of just gets forgotten about, doesn't even appear in the end. I think it might be something that ends up just being in the next Tory manifesto, and just probably just as vague again. I mean, it'll.
Yeah, like levelling up, not really worth the paper that it's written on. Like.
Well, that's another point. Briefly, they seem to have just ditched. I mean, levelling up hasn't been mentioned, so that seems to have just been sort of forgotten about now. That seems to be a dead policy. So I do want to be a bit nice. I think there were two things I saw which I thought were actually quite good. The scrapping of the increase in national insurance, I thought was very good, because effectively that was just Rishi Sunak unnecessarily taxing working people, young people in particular, completely unfairly and disproportionately, which I'm assuming you agree with.
Anyway, so they might as well tax. You might as well tax.
Yeah. That was my cynical view of it as well. And the second one actually was the cutting of duties on beer, cider, and cancelling the increase in duty on beer, cider, and wine, which admittedly makes me sound like a bit of an alcoholic. I'm not going to lie, but I do genuinely think at the moment the hospitality industries, your pubs, your restaurants are really struggling, and they need help. And I think that is obviously a positive thing. Though I would argue that it would help if you actually let more immigrants into the country so they didn't have staff shortages. That would also help. But this is, I think, I'll be nice and say that was also a good thing.
they're both good. I will agree with you on that, but being cynical again, a lot of the benefits that are gonna be completely wiped out by the other fiscally irresponsible decisions that the government has made.
And we haven't even we haven't even talked about inflation, which of course, with the drop in the pound, imports will become more expensive.
And the pound last time, I'm going to Europe in 2 months' time, and I checked yesterday to exchange money, and it was like 80 cents.
It's not
so
good.
You know, imports are going to be ridiculously expensive. Food prices have gone up anyway. I was talking, the typical, how much is a loaf of bread? How much is, some butter? I was shopping in the supermarket today. Butter's gone up to over £5.
It's
ridiculous. £5.
It's crazy.
Butter. Like
it's scary. And also, obviously that means as inflation goes up, interest rates will go up, which of course then completely cancels out the growth.
Impacted.
And mortgages as well, of course. Not that any millennials really have that issue, but
no, we don't. But I'm just like.
But but obviously, an ordinary person with a family, can't afford a sudden hike up in their mortgage rates.
Going up, their food shops going up, their electric bills going up, their gas is going up. Where's the bread? But also, there's no raise in real-time wages. So getting a wage increase to match inflation.
Well, except bankers.
Bankers, because
except the bankers.
Made sure about that. But I think this leads quite nicely into Labour conference, which I think the general gist of Labour conference was something's got to give.
Yeah. So it's
got to be distrust.
Yeah. So let's move. So obviously, so Labour had its conference. What day did it officially start? It obviously ended yesterday. When was the actual start date? Was it Friday?
I believe it was Friday. Yeah.
So so it was in Liverpool, and obviously there was lots of people looking to see what the Labour Party would do in response to the new Prime Minister, this new change, of course, in economic policy. So obviously, Katie, being a member of the Labour Party, what was your sort of takeaway, your general feeling?
Okay. My hot take from conference for the first time in a while was very positive. I left conference. I didn't attend conference, but I watched conference for the whole time that it was on as a member. And it's the first time in a while that I felt energised. And that Labour was approaching these problems with costed solutions, right? So solutions that Keir Starmer can sit there and say, this is how we will pay for this, and this is how we will do this. So it was nice to see that a lot of the young members' ideas were coming through to the top and being supported, such as proportional representation, nationalisation of rail and also energy. I feel like Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, his closing speech at conference, was the speech of a Prime Minister. It is more prime ministerial than I have ever seen Liz Truss look in my entire life. He had a plan, he had a vision, and he laid it out to the British public, which is what I think we need at the moment. And in Labour's view is he's selling himself, I read it in The Guardian, as the antidote to Liz Truss. And that's what we need. He's basically taken the Tory policy and just flipped it completely on its head. We're not investing in bankers, we're investing in people. We're not and it just felt hopeful. I'm intrigued to hear what you think, though, because obviously I was very much like,
yeah. I mean, it was interesting. I must admit, I'm a bit of a this is going to sound like a weird phrase, but let's just go with it. I'm a bit of a conference skeptic. I just sort of see these sort of party conferences as a bit of a sort of, they don't obviously, it's obviously good for the parties because they come up with policy ideas and discuss policy, but I don't think many people really pay that much attention. I think obviously in terms of what it does for party support, usually you'll find every party gets a little boost on their weekend. I'm really curious to see what happens to the Tories next weekend. That will be fascinating. But so for me, it's kind of a bit like, obviously as a political geek, I'll watch it, but I am kind of a bit I'm slightly skeptical about how big a deal is this for most ordinary people. However, that being said, I'll be positive. I will also be positive. When I watched Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, it was the first time I actually saw him and thought this could be a prime minister. Before that, I sort of had this view of, well, probably about a year ago, I had a view of Keir Starmer as someone who was a bit of a, a sort of a Kinnock character, was going to effectively fix the party before it, then gets taken over by someone else who can then get Labour into power. But actually, yesterday, it was the first time I actually saw a speech from someone. I thought, actually, this guy is much more confident. He's much more energetic. He feels like he could genuinely be a prime minister. And I think he seems to finally feel that as well. I think the big comparison, obviously should be with his speech the year before, which, of course, was far too long. I think, was it 89 minutes or something? Just crazy long. He got heckled. He was heckled. It was just not it was not good.
It was a different atmosphere.
Yeah, it was completely different. And I think the change over that year, to me, really symbolizes the fact that, as he said, I believe that Labour is now confident enough and does believe this is their moment. They do strongly believe that this will be their time.
And I think they have the policies to back it up, right? So I always look at conference. I agree with you when it comes to how the impact that it has on the general public, etc. But I always look at conference as a political geek and also as a member of the party as a little sort of amuse-bouche to the actual policy that you're going to get and the actual handbook that people fight elections with, your policies. And the taster, I'm intrigued as what the Tories are going to do, because that taster from Labour was basically everything that every political and economic commentator has been calling for in response to this mini budget and in response to this energy crisis. Particularly putting the point on energy, I think that the biggest point out here for Keir Starmer, everybody did focus on the railways as well, but I think Great British Energy was something that will resonate with the public and is something that the public actually supports at the moment. And I would like to see, like you said, what our bubble in the polls will be, because I think his proposal for it was really well put.
Yeah. I absolutely agree in principle that, investment in renewable energy is clearly a good thing. However, I want to see detail. The devil will be in the detail, because obviously it was an announcement. It was quite vague. It was an interesting, very interesting thing, which I would love to see. But we need to see more detail. Although, in defense of Keir Starmer, obviously there's not an election for 2 years, so he has got time to come up with the detail. But, I want to see, a bit of detail on it.
I agree, but I think that in the initial approach to also basically, it's not sort of nationalising energy, it's basically putting a nationally owned energy company in the mix that will be utilising renewable energy. And I think that's a really important point, because people say, Labour, they're bringing back Article 4, It isn't actually. Both of the policies that Keir Starmer has outlined with regards to a nationalised company are basically, with the railways, he's going to let the contracts elapse.
Yes, I think that I was going to say that's a key point.
He's not buying them back because that's fiscally irresponsible. As he said, there's no point in buying it. They'll charge us top whack. We might as well wait for the contract and bring it back into public ownership. And with the energy, he's not actually going to be buying out any of the energy companies that are there. He's going to be providing an alternative for British people. Which, when you look at the statistics, he said in his speech, when you look at the statistics of the Chinese Communist Party has a stake in our nuclear industry.
Yeah, is it for EDF? Is it France?
Yeah, in Britain, pay their bills to an energy company that is owned by France.
Yeah.
Like
it's a bizarre situation.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. I am intrigued about water, though, as well, because he didn't mention water, but I would like to see water renationalised, because we're the only country, really, that has a fully privatised.
I don't think people don't really. It's an issue that no one really talks about.
We're the only country. Even the United States of America owns its own water network.
I find that interesting, because just again, it's an issue which never gets talked about. I think obviously I can understand why, because Yeah.
It's so important because all of these sewage dumps into the ocean, everything, that's your water companies, and they're still charging you to clean that water, and they're not cleaning it.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. Just makes me so angry. The pollution dumping, it's so angry. Yeah.
The devil is in the detail, but I was happy with where he was going, but I hope our manifesto goes further when it comes to etc.
Yeah. I think another thing that interested me in the speech was he seems to, after being criticised for not doing this, he seems to now be going after the Tories a lot more. He seems to be much more. Though I thought it was interesting. He seemed to be attacking the Conservatives, not Liz Truss. He was very much attacking the whole record of the Tory, which I think is a clever, smart thing to do. To attack the Conservative record as a whole, not just attack this one person. I think that's quite a sensible thing.
When he said the Prime Minister, of which there have been many.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is true. They can't say that they're, the old Theresa May line of strong and stable, because that's absolutely strong. Running around that have seen 3 or 4 prime ministers. It's
Also, I think it was also interesting. He didn't just attack the Tories; he also attacked the SNP as well, which I wasn't actually expecting. But he did very much. It was very much this: we will not do deals with the SNP. Never, ever. He ever said never, never, never. That kind of idea.
Oh yeah, it's off the table, basically.
Yeah. Which I thought was, a smart thing to do. However, I still think this will be an issue for Labour regardless, because I think if we get to an election and the polls are close, that line, the Tories will use that line, because I think it is, sadly from a Labour perspective, I think it is a very effective line, particularly when you're appealing to Middle England.
It is, but one of the questions that Labour do need to be asking themselves, I agree with what Keir said, but one of the questions that Labour need to ask themselves is, he didn't do the same for the Liberals, right? Let's point that out.
Yeah.
Are the Liberals going to get enough seats if we're in a minority government situation? Because we need to look at national swing, right?
Yeah.
And if a minority government situation, are the Liberals going to get... Are we going to be forced into a coalition with the SNP? And how would that work? So I understand why he did it. From a political point of view, it makes complete sense to distance yourself from them so that it gives the Tory bark less bite. It will kind of take the sting away. But I think from a perspective of we've still got 2 years left until the next election. I don't know, but I think that the other mixed message coming out is the proportional representation part.
I did want to talk about PR.
Yeah. That opens up the fact that the Labour Party itself, so the members, are more open to ideas of coalitions for progress and all of this sort of stuff. I think that sends a clear message from the membership. Keir Starmer, however, I think it should be noted, which is one of my only big criticisms of him, is still against proportional representation.
Yeah, so just for the context, so at Labour Party conference, there was a motion to support, I believe, just to explicitly support PR.
I was very happy. I voted for it as a member.
Which obviously, so I'm right in saying it got the overwhelming support of the Labour Party. It passed easily on the floor.
Yeah.
And so now I think this will be the one sort of, I think, possible internal. I mean, why does the Labour Party love to have? Why does it love these internal fights? I don't get it. It'll be this. I think might be the issue. Which
baby.
This will be the thing which might be the sort of internal fight over the next couple of years. Because Keir Starmer is very opposed to PR. He's made that publicly known in podcasts and speeches whenever he's asked about it. He makes it very known he's opposed to PR.
He's non-apologetic about it. He's very the fact that he believes that first past the post is the best electoral system for the United Kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. And it's obviously, I strongly disagree with that. I think that's, it is odd. But so I think it will be fascinating. I suspect sadly what will happen, I think, when it comes to the next election, I suspect Labour will have some very general thing about how they want to improve the quality of democracy, but they won't have an explicit commitment to PR.
The clause of the motion that was proposed was it would have to be addressed by the end of the first term of government.
Yeah, but in theory, could Keir Starmer still, as leader, just sort of say, well, actually, No, I mean that's the problem, right? Like
this is the thing. It would have to be addressed by the end of the first term of government. So at the end of the day, I think that there needs to be a long conversation within Labour, and we need to have a really sort of matter of fact conversation. The main arguments against PR that I've seen are that people argue that there's more chances of extreme parties getting into power, which is why, as Labour members, they cannot support proportional representation, because they cannot support the ability of far either end of the spectrum parties being able to take power in the United Kingdom. However, as we've discussed before, when you look at proportional representation, actually, I would argue as a Labour member that Labour would actively benefit from proportional representation, because most of the time we have a high concentration of votes in urban areas where people's votes are not, they don't count for anything.
Well,
like,
yes,
Diana Abbott,
the votes,
majority
the
of
votes,
over 80,000.
yeah, the votes stack up in London and don't really add to much. Yeah,
so we've got Diana Abbott with like a majority of like 80 or something stupid.
Yeah,
we've got Labour MPs in other parts of the country that have majorities of 1,000 who have to fight tooth and nail for their seat.
yeah.
Why don't we make sure that everybody, it's proportionally allocated? Because proportionally, Labour do often get more of the vote nationally than the Tories do. We just don't win as many seats.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear when you look at sort of things like the electoral calculator, Labour needs to win higher percentage votes to get majorities.
Percentage votes to get majorities. So looking at it from an electioneering perspective, it makes no sense to go first past the post.
Yeah,
but,
I think,
as I said previously, it's very difficult for a prime minister to get rid of a system that elected them.
Well, yeah, as we saw again, they're going to be the blasphemous liberal criticizes Justin Trudeau. That's what happened in Canada when they won in 2015. They were coming into it as the third party, so they said, "Oh, we'll support." Maybe I'm being a bit cynical now. They said, "We'll support PR." And of course, as soon as they won their majority with the first past post system, they said, "Actually, no, we're not going to."
Same with the Democrats in America at the moment. They're heavily critical of the Electoral College, but it worked to get Joe Biden elected, so they
won't change it. Which is why I suspect if you do, the only way you will ever get PR in this country is for a coalition government. I think that's probably the only.
I will completely agree with you on that.
Yeah. So I mean, before we move on to Italy, I want to just raise one more point. I'm just trying to think why Starmer would be opposed to PR. And one idea I did have: is he afraid of the Labour Party splitting? Is he afraid that sort of the Jeremy Corbyns, the Clive Lewises, the sort of, could they sort of go and form a new sort of a Podemos of England or the UK, for example? Is that a fear?
I think it is a very reasonable fear. Obviously, I don't know whether that's why Keir is sceptical, but I would say that in the Labour Party, it is a fear. But I think that I am of the belief system of, if they want to do that, if they're in a PR system, let them. It's just another party that people are able to vote for. I believe before I wouldn't say before I'm a socialist, I'm a Democrat, but I am as much a socialist as I am a Democrat, and I believe in people's democratic rights to vote for things that represent them best. And I think that in some instances, we do have members in our party where the Labour Party doesn't necessarily represent their views, and they come to the Labour Party because we're the closest to do that, because we're on the left. And the Liberals have it, the Tories have it. I've talked to people who are right-wing, who vote Conservative, who do not believe in the Conservative ideology. It's just politically, that's the closest thing to what they believe in. So I think he is scared of it. I think he would be, as any leader should be, of the party. Obviously, you don't want to oversee the split of the party that's over 100 years old and on your watch. You know what I mean? But my mentality is, we should always be seeking for greater representative democracy. And if that means that Jeremy Corbyn leaves and forms a party that is further to the left of Labour, then so be it.
Yeah.
Do I think that it will be a threat to Labour? No, I don't. I don't think it's as much of a threat as people think, because I look at a lot of these people look at the urban elite, which is a big criticism of the right to the left of, the urban liberal elite. Britain is a very liberal country. It's not fairly left-wing, it's not fairly right-wing. And I think it's now, with how the country is reacting to Liz Truss, that shows you that Britain is a centrist country at heart.
Yeah.
Agree with that, or whether you don't agree with that, that's fine. But I think that we need to look at it on the basis of everybody should be able to vote for what they want to vote for. It's about representative democracy. Do I, as a Labour member, fear an offshoot party like that? Not at all. The more the merrier, I would say. The more chance to give people what they want and to give people representative democracy. But I don't view it as a threat, because I think that the policies that the Labour Party are presenting at the moment represent the British public.
No, I think I do definitely agree. I think if there was a PR system and a new a sort of upper demos of the UK emerged, I still think, as we see in Spain, I still think the Labour Party would be far more popular than that party. So before we move on to Italy, give the conference a rating out of 10.
I'd say 8.
Fair enough. Actually, I think I'd agree with that in terms of sort of looking at it from a sort of if this is Labour's kind of their first sort of audition for being a party government. I think it's been a very successful conference for them. And
Harold Wilson, you'd say you always give yourself a bit more space. Always aim for an 8, never aim for a 10.
Yeah, and I think I will be, obviously we'll talk about Tory party conference next week, and it'll be fascinating to see how Liz Truss responds, because it does feel like now she has been put on the back foot. So it will be fascinating to see what she does.
They can get to conference because all the trains are cancelled.
Oh yeah, of course. That's all right. They could all afford Ubers. It's fine.
They'll all drive there in their Range Rovers.
Exactly. Right? They'll be all right. They'll be fine.
But yeah, also solidarity with the striking workers next week. Good on you.
Speaking of, sorry, a very quick detail. Did you watch Have I Got News For You this week with Mick Lynch?
Was Mick Lynch on there?
He was, and I actually was not gonna lie, I was kind of disappointed. I think he almost struggled. I feel like he does better in confrontational environments, and I think he kind of weirdly struggled with it being a more lighthearted sort of show, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, it was a bit.
I was interested because I thought, well, Ian and him are gonna vibe because like Ian agrees with him. Like Ian they agree with him.
I thought my main criticism of the show, they did make jokes about late trains way too many times. Like they made the same sort of joke about fire. It was kind of like the first time it was funny, second time okay, third time I was just like, stop! You're used to doing the same joke.
Too much, please stop.
Yeah, exactly. Literally, it was like, okay, yeah, we get the joke. It was funny. Do something else, please. Yeah. So moving on to Italy, and first of all, people might want to, first of all, I always believe we should talk about other countries. I believe we should try and talk about different things. But why? So why should we be interested in Italy? I would argue that first of all, Italy, it was a founding member of the European Community, now the European Union. It was a founding member of NATO. It has culturally and historically always been a relatively important part of Europe, even when it wasn't Italy. It was all these sort of city-states that were quite important. So yeah, so I think it's very important we do talk about Italy, and particularly, as I'm sure you'll know, on Sunday a Conservative coalition made up of 4 parties, but predominantly 3 larger parties, won a majority to both the Chamber of Deputies, which is sort of their equivalent of the House of Commons, their lower chamber, and the Senate, which is an elected version of the House of Lords, the upper chamber. So this sort of right-wing coalition won a majority in both houses. And this right-wing coalition was made up of 4 parties. The largest of these parties is the far right Brothers of Italy, who are led by soon to be Italy's new Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. It's then the second largest party in this coalition is the Lega Party, the League, formerly the Northern League, which is led by Matteo Salvini, who has sort of been the darling of the far right in Europe for, I'd say, 5 years now, probably. And the sort of third of these parties, this will be a name that gives you a blast from the past, Forza Italia, led by Mr. Berlusconi, who again, of course, was Prime Minister for a very long time in the 90s and early noughties.
That kid.
The comeback. I think he was kicked out of Italian Parliament in 2013 because of tax fraud.
Jail.
I think he avoided jail despite being. I think he was sentenced to 4 years, but never actually went to prison.
Right.
Yeah, standard. Interestingly as well, I sent you this. Berlusconi was elected to the Senate. His girlfriend, who is 50 years younger than he is, no judgment, but okay, was elected to the was elected to the Chamber of Deputies, which, you know, again seems pretty standard for Italian politics, which is probably not good for its reputation. But yeah, so but more seriously, obviously, this obviously sees this Brothers of Italy party in particular has seen a huge surge in support. Its vote in the Chamber of Deputies went up from 4% at the last election to nearly 26% this time around. And it should also be noted that Lega, which is another far-right party, its support went down from 17.4 to 8.77. But broadly speaking, there has been this strong victory from the far right in Italy. And it obviously is concerning. So just to give you an idea of who Giorgia Meloni is, she holds very sort of socially conservative views on all sorts of issues on LGBT plus rights. She's very opposed to same-sex couples having adoption rights. On abortion rights, she's very, very socially conservative. And also on migration, she's very, very close to Viktor Orban. She very much is, believes in a strong Italian borders, doesn't like the idea of sort of immigration from North Africa, for example. So it's very much this very strongly conservative far-right person is now leading Italy, which is obviously, from my perspective, I'd say quite concerning. What do you?
Well, I will preface this by saying I'm not very literate in Italian politics. I do spend more time looking at German and French politics, but I have been trying to read up about it. So thank you for that summary. It was very, very useful to actually being able to navigate. And I do agree with you that I think one of the things that I know that we wanted to do when we started this podcast was to talk about world issues as well and talk about other countries, because one of the things that we don't want to do as a nation, and we don't want to see the nation do, is turn inward with economic policy, with any policy really. You should always be looking outward, and I think that this election of the far right is, I think that it's to view it as I would view it, it is another insurgency from the far right within Europe. So it's not the first instance, and I don't think it's going to be the last. We've got a far right government in Poland at the moment. We've got far right governments popping up. And I think that Italy is very significant. And I'm looking at it from a legacy point of view as well. These politicians, the legacy that they have within Italy is not a good one. It's not harking back to a good time in Europe's history, let alone Italy's history. So just for some more context, the new leader has been endorsed by Benito Mussolini's granddaughter, who is like an out and out proud fascist, and runs the continuation of, Brothers of Italy is a continuation and derivative of Mussolini's fascist party. And so I think that should not be underestimated, that we're in a position now in Europe where we have legacy parties that are reviving and reusing really the slogans that were utilised by fascist parties during the 30s and 40s. So the Brothers of Italy was elected on like a basis of like God, homeland, and what
family was a big one.
Like homeland, family, God. That was like theirs, which is very similar to the slogans that Mussolini used to get.
There was also a lot of you find with Italian nationalism, particularly on the far right, from what I've read, and I'm not an expert on Italian politics or history, but I have read a decent amount, and I think another similarity you get is this idea that Italian nationalism, there's insecurity within lots of nationalisms, maybe possibly within all, but particularly Italian nationalism, there's always been this idea that Italy, despite being a major European country, has never been economically as strong as Germany or France or the UK, historically was never militaristically as strong, didn't have an empire before, I think, 1936, and it invaded, what was it? I can't remember the African country it invaded. And my mind's gone blank. There was an African country Italy invaded, and it essentially was just so Mussolini could say he had an empire, but it was basically just a lump of dirt, which was completely useless and cost them a bunch of money. It was the ultimate sort of, it was just So
didn't they also try and invade Albania?
I believe they had influence over Albania. Like Mussolini had essentially flexed. I think he put a sort of puppet government in Albania. So yeah, this, I think there is obviously. I don't want to. I'm always
Ethiopia. Sorry to interrupt.
Ethiopia. No, it was, sorry. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Ethiopia. But I think it should always be highlighted that obviously we're not saying that Giorgia Meloni's going to march through Rome with black shirts, and obviously not. I'm not saying it's the same thing. I think what should also be noted is how this has happened. So Italy over the last sort of 10, 20 years has been economically not performing particularly well. There's been lots of poverty in Italy, and particularly the last sort of few years, because of the COVID pandemic in particular, there's been political instability, there's been economic instability, and it feels like, as the far right does in many countries, this has been the formula for this emergence of this party and the new sort of, this new far right government now, which we'll see in Italy.
Obviously, as a historian, I utilise history to look at and understand the past, right? That's what I believe we should do. And looking at a historical perspective, this has always been the penchant of the far right, right? So when a country is not doing very well, when a country is struggling economically, when there are growing divisions between the wealthy and the poor, what happens is we get this anti-immigrant rhetoric, where there's this decision to the government and the parties wish to blame someone. And the easiest group to blame are immigrants because they're very easily identifiable. And what we're getting now is we're getting the same, but we're also expanding that cultural discourse with LGBT communities and also with women. It's very easy to target these communities because they're very easy to spot. When they gather, when they're asking. So obviously you'll be able to spot an LGBT relationship when they have adopted a child. So, and I think that there's a common misconception with a lot of British people about Italy, is people have this conception of Italy as it's very sort of liberal and chill and everybody sort of relaxed. Actually, gay people in Italy do not have the right to get married. They're still at the civil partnership level. They've never had the right to get married. Gay people don't have the right to adopt children. Like the rights are still very. People think that it is out there. So I think that these are communities very much that we're seeing in the UK at the moment. There's a lot of parallels that are already oppressed that are now being further oppressed and utilised by the far right to blame for a cultural narrative to say, well, this is why the country isn't doing very well because of migrants, because of this, because of that. And I think that one of the things that I'm taking from this as I'm reading about Italy is I'm also concerned about Italy's position now on a world stage. We are in the middle of, whether you want to call it like a cold conflict or whatever, with Russia, because we are technically fighting Russia. It's just Ukraine are doing the actual fighting, right? So we're in the middle of this, and we now have a government in Italy which is a member of NATO
and
the European Union, which has praised Putin in the past, have people praising Putin, sympathetic.
I think it's
Putin. And I think it's we need to look at this. With the migration policy that they're now pushing, where she literally said, "Oh yeah, I'd blockade Italy with the Navy." You've got these two things that are interjecting, and the impact that this could have on the wider world is ridiculous.
I think it's important to clarify the point on Ukraine quickly. So the official policy of the Brothers of Italy is that they will support Ukraine. And I think one of the big reasons why I am slightly more confident bizarrely in the Brothers of Italy compared to the Lega and the Forza Italia parties is that the Brothers of Italy sits in the European Conservative and Reformist group, which is the same group as the Law and Justice Party. So they have close relationships to the Polish Law and Justice Party. So I'm hoping that will mean that Italy will stay the course and stay unified with Europe. However, it should be noted that particularly Salvini and Berlusconi in the last few weeks, Salvini, has had a historic friendship with Putin. It's well documented. There's photos of him with Putin in Red Square. There's photos of him wearing, Putin's shirts, and it's very, they have a historic friendship. And this was even shown in the last month. Salvini has questioned sanctions. He's questioned, sanctions on Russia. He's sort of he sort of clouded it in a sort of, well, I support Ukraine, but do we really need sanctions? It was sort of, he tried to cloud it, but it was very much this kind of idea. Well, that just stop it. And Berlusconi as well claimed just last week that he felt Putin was pushed into invading Ukraine to put, and I quote, decent people in government in Kyiv. And so this was just last week. So there are clearly people in the Italian government who have extremely, let's just say, questionable views on the Ukrainian conflict, and that is obviously concerning. However, I do hope that, as I said, because of the Brothers of Italy's official policy and their close relationship to the Law and Justice Party in Poland, who I'm not particularly a fan of, but in this case it is helpful. You would hope that they would stay the course. And also, I think from what I gather, and I'm again not an expert, Meloni is something of a pragmatist. While she is far right, she isn't stupid. And clearly, Italy does rely on Europe a lot for money, both economic development funding to the south and also trade, particularly in the north. They're also in the south as well because they grow agriculture and things. So I think, given that there's potentially economic sanctions and issues with Hungary coming up within Europe, I don't think Italy would really want the same thing, particularly as they are struggling economically. So I am, while obviously everything should be taken with great caution, I am trying to look positively and trying to sort of see how this won't be the end of European unity.
Yeah, no, I think that what's going to happen with Hungary is going to be a great indicator and a great warning. I think that Hungary and what the European Union does to respond to Hungary is going to be incredibly important at this moment, because I think that what we've got in the European Union at the moment is with the rise of the far right, there is this sort of breaking apart of the essential bits of European democracy that we all agree on and that we all protect. So, in Hungary, the absolute disregard for democracy and democratic process, etc. That's a fundamental part of European democracy and European beliefs that brought all together in the first place, right? So, and it's same with I would say the same with Poland with women's rights and LGBT rights. No, that's not how we do things in Europe. And there needs to be a readdress of, if we're going to stay together as a European Union, these are the things that are non-negotiable.
I think it's I agree with you, just to be clear, but I think I'm trying to think of it from Europe's perspective. I think the difficulty, obviously, particularly with regards to Hungary, is I think Europe will start putting sanctions on Hungary, might start withdrawing funding. I think there is a fear that they might push Viktor Orban into the arms of Vladimir Putin. I think that's the fear. I think that's why they're
very, very careful.
Yeah.
I agree, but I think that there needs to be a sort of doubling down with the European.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because at the moment, I'm questioning it. Like, obviously, I was a big supporter of the European Union and Britain staying in the European Union. I still am. I would still like Britain to be part of it. And I think that even in these conversations, Britain's voice would be incredibly useful because we were always sceptical. The same as the Dutch voice is so important right now because the Dutch are Eurosceptic. So they can bring a lot to the table when it comes to discussing what Europe stands for. So, but I think that there needs to be the approach that the European Union has to the death penalty, for example, should be the approach that they have to civil liberties in general.
Yes, yeah. So I think the final point I want to make before we close up, I think you sort of hinted to it. I think obviously we are seeing the emergence of the far right in some cases, but I think it would be slightly simplistic just to say this is clearly an emergence. The far right is on the march everywhere, and it's what I would say. I think the better way to describe it would be there is a clear ideological divide in Europe as a whole, and we've seen the far right ascendancy in, as we said, Italy. The Swedish Democrats the far right party in Sweden. The Swedish Democrats had a very good performance when they came second in the elections just last month. But in contrast, we have also seen social democracy have some successes and sort of more globalist parties. So you've seen obviously the victory of Scholz in Germany last year, Slovenia earlier this year, elected a new sort of liberal, international sort of globalist, internationalist, centrist liberal government. And of course, yeah, so I think there is a clear ideological divide. And I think obviously one country which I think shows it best is probably France, right? Where you have Emmanuel Macron versus Marie Le Pen. And that's arguably, the ultimate sort of the far right versus the sort of, so liberal internationalist. So I think, this I think does highlight an interesting ideological battle, which I think will probably go on probably for a while, I suspect.
I agree. And I think that, we can use this battle and we can use this ideological shift to position Britain and to position our politics, right? So this is one of the things that I think that we both value when we look outwards to the world. It's to enable us to position Britain and to enable us to see, okay, where should we be positioning ourselves in the world? What should we be engaging with? What should we be standing for on an international stage? What should we be advocating for? And I think that for the first time in a long time, to draw it back to the UK, looking at the way that European politics is sort of fracturing at the moment, really, I would say, between the sort of, the liberals and the right, because it's not really the left and the right anymore. It's sort of like the centrist liberals and the right, really.
I think the best I would always describe it as sort of progressives and internationalists probably against nationalists and isolationists. I think that's probably I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
It's true. And I would say that Britain at the moment, we have, so let's not sugarcoat it. We are on the precipice of a very right-wing government. We have a very right-wing government at the moment. It's not fascist, but it is very right-wing.
Yeah.
And to sit here and to say that we're not part of that, we are part of that fracturing in Europe, and we're experiencing it. But I think that we're sort of getting to the stage where America got in 2020, where it's sort of, we're kind of seeing over to the other side of it, and we're kind of saying, actually, that this government doesn't ideologically agree with what I agree with. It doesn't believe in public services. It doesn't believe in these things. Actually, it's not core to our values. And I think that for the first time in a long time in Britain, I'm feeling more optimistic for British politics at this time, to see that it is sort of, the people are sort of shifting and saying, well, actually, this mini budget is ridiculous. And I think that to put ourselves on that scale, we're now being drawn back into the liberal politics of France, etc., with the outward look because of Ukraine, because of our commitment to Ukraine. I mean, it needs to be said that Britain is like the #1 supporter of Ukraine, right? Nationally, like, we've been giving them the most money and stuff, like, we support them. So I think that it's interesting to see how we've changed. And so what the point that I'm trying to make is, Italy has a far-right government now, but it doesn't necessarily mean, exactly as you said earlier, that it's fascist and Europe's going to fracture and everybody's going to fall apart. And it's a process, right? People will go through this process. And I think that one of the things that we need to do now as young people, and also is just keep the airwaves open and keep your eyes looking around and seeing what's happening. And when you see injustices, civil injustices, as we've said with the EU, they need to be called out. She's going to start to go for LGBT communities. It needs to be called out on an international level. She's going to go for women. It needs to be called out. She's going to go for migrants. It needs to be called out. And this is exactly the same as in Poland. They went for abortion. It needs to be called out. And I think that that's where we should be as a country, and that's where we should be looking to go. Europe needs to stop playing lip service to this nationalist isolationist. No, we are all connected. Where Italy goes for, it has implications. So we need to be involved. And I think that, as I said, seeing what they do with Hungary is going to be really, really, really indicative of what's going to happen when it comes to breaches on civil liberties throughout Europe and within NATO as well, and what we're going to tolerate and what we're not going to tolerate. And
I think that's a good place to wrap up. What are we talking about? Sort of what topics do you want to talk about next week? I think obviously it'll be Tory Party conference.
God, yeah.
For me personally, there's elections in Quebec, which I really want to talk about.
Yeah.
Those are happening on Monday, so people keep your eye out on that. I think first of all, I think it's quite a fascinating case in of itself, but also I think there's some important lessons for Scotland I think we can learn from it. So we'll definitely talk about that, because I suspect it won't be talked about by anyone else in the UK. So I'm going to give it some lip service, and I'm sure we'll see what happens in the week.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in the week. But yeah, I think Tory Party conference and that are a good place to start, and then we'll see if there's any sort of standout points. I mean, we could talk about the polls, because I can imagine that the Tories are going to take another dip in the polls.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, we will definitely look at polling. We will definitely look at polling. That will be fascinating. That's not
going to look too great for Liz Truss this weekend.
Okay. So as always, thank you so much for listening. We really, really do appreciate it. Mm-hmm. If you can, as I always say, like, share, subscribe, all that jazz, tell your friends, etc. Yes. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.